Greetings, it's I, Tentus Van Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue my discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons 5th Ed D&D. We've been talking about material from the Dungeon Master's Guide. And of course, we were talking about role-playing. And not role-playing as you as a PC. Role-playing as you as a DM. So, we talked about last time using your voice to add to character. There's more things you can do. You can use your face and eyes just by, looking shadily to one side, or mumbling on the side of your mouth, or doing something of the similar, just like grinning, snarling, making your face make things. It helps add to the character. Now I look kind of like I'm angry, or I'm very happy about this. Then you use your hands, too. You can be very expressive in the way that you use your hands, making gestures and movements with your arms that mean that you can add flair to the way that you're doing things with just movement of the arms without having to move your entire body. You're effectively using yourself, your hand, face, arms, mouth, all of it as tools to express what's going on with these characters that you're playing. Now, I've talked about in the past how some players enjoy role-playing or interacting as their characters more than others. The fact is that you're acting as the creatures and monsters that they are going to be interacting with is made to draw out more of them wanting to act as their character. You're attempting to kind of lure out a little bit more of that essence of a role player without forcing the point by effectively role-playing yourself. You're attempting to give everyone an option to interact with role-playing moments, especially those social interactions which help define characters, more than just the combats and all the other things that maybe some people definitely prefer. It's not saying that I'm pushing the point of this. I'm making something that maybe you want to also try to do a little bit of. I'm inspiring. You're going to want to make sure people that of all different types have something to do during these sessions where role-playing heavy time periods have to take place. When you're in these role-playing heavy periods, you want to draw everyone in and kind of appeal to everyone. Of course, those folks that are role-playing heavy people, they love to role-play, they're going to be taking a lot of the spotlight. Of course, you're going to be interacting directly with them, but you're going to have to make sure to reach out to the other players in the group as not to let them be the only ones hogging the spotlight. You want the spotlight to kind of be shared and spread amongst all your players. Though they themselves might be part of this inspiration for others to join in, have fun, have a good time, and join the fun you're having of acting, of role-playing. Someone who likes exploring more might see these social interactions as a way to push forward the storyline and push you to the next place you're going to explore. That would be the point of the interactions there. Someone that's more of a puzzle solving, if you present the interactions in such a way that they've got to do something or say something to overcome these people to get them in their corner, then they might be interested diving depth in it. If someone's more confrontative and trying to draw out, reactions out of the NPCs, you gotta watch them. Because they're going to want to interact, but they might not always act productively. And of course, the players who like to optimize their characters and to test out those abilities. People that focus more on combat more often. Having some argumentative situations where they're having almost a verbal conflict might be a way to encourage them to join in the role-playing a little bit. It functions as doing some of what they like, but doing it in a role-playing perspective. And that's what you're trying to do. You kind of have to recognize what your players' aspects are and role-play yourself according to them to sort of draw them in. You're luring them into the situations you want to build. Still, for the last group there, if you create some kind of combat-related connection to whatever you're describing to them, it's a great way of getting them involved. They're going to have an interaction with a vizier or a king or like a priest or something that's hiring them effectively to go kill something, to go into combat with something, and you're negotiating perhaps for price or, various other aspects of this deal, this plan coming together. And that reflects into them some role-playing aspect of the combat they love. They're going to do their job. Now, there might be things you want to do to effectively target specific players with role-playing. These are little actions you can do. In a normal conversation, you have, of course, as I said, those that are going to want to push forward the conversation. By making sort of targeted experiences, it pertains more to balancing out everyone and giving them a shot when it comes to role-playing / social interactions. You have your normal people that you don't want to shut out, but maybe perhaps you'll do something like one of the people you're interacting with is an elf who only talks to elves. So the elf character in your team who perhaps doesn't talk the most, is kind of like the less role-playing person, is sort of drawn to the front and brought into there because they're going to want to act as a go-between between the other characters and this elf here, the other characters that might want to say more. So they might be like, look, can you kind of try to convince him of this? He's not listening to us. And that person can then go forward and do it. So they're still getting that interaction. They're still not being left behind, but they're giving the opportunity for this other person to also be involved in the conversation when maybe they normally wouldn't be. They normally wouldn't be the person or the type to do so. It allows for this longer conversation to exist without them just sitting there and being boring, not being included. Another thing is that some of the players might dominate a conversation. You could very easily include the others. If you're conversing with like a duke or a king or something, and let's say the barbarian character, who's obviously not a big talker, isn't saying anything, the king might ask like, well, what does your barbarian friend think of this? Something like that that's going to get them involved to say something. Now, granted, it might not have them have a full conversation, but this might turn a little point in time where they'll say a couple of things and at least get them involved in this, that their opinion gets said, that it's balances again the conversation between all players just a little bit more. These are two different ways of looking at it. If your characters and your players are already better at speaking, I would recommend the first way of doing it, where you get some kind of connection, as I said, like the racial connection or something else. If they are people that aren't as adept at speaking, like new to it, they need to help find their voice, doing something like with the barbarian, it might be a way to encourage them to speak that way. Alright, let us move on in our conversation and talk about objects. There's going to be a time and a place in your course of your adventures where your players are going to have to interact with, well, objects. This interaction might be something like cutting a rope, breaking open a coffin that might control a vampire, breaking a lock of a door, breaking down a door itself, breaking through a window. Most object interactions are, of course, destruction. Now, the important part about this is that objects themselves are relatively destructible. You can pretty much destroy anything, given the right tools and the right amount of time. Those are two major factors when it comes to destroying anything. If you don't have the right tools and you don't have enough time, it's probably not going to be broken down. It's also important to use common sense. If I'm a fighter with a normal sword going against a 2-foot thick wall of stone, I'm not going to break it down. More than likely, my sword is going to break before the wall breaks. It doesn't make any sense. Why, if I have some kind of mining pick or something like that that's made to break apart stone, and give enough time, I can maybe get through this wall. It'll probably be really loud, but I can get through it. For the purposes of the rules, though, when we talk about an object, we're talking about an inanimate item, something like a book, a window, a door, a rope. We're not talking about things that are combinations of objects, like buildings or vehicles, which have multiple parts to them. So we're talking about the statistics of an item that you can destroy. First off, of course, it's going to have an armor class. This is how hard it is for you to damage it, not how hard it is for you to hit it. Damage it. That's an important distinction, because it could be very easy to technically hit this object like a stone wall. It might be very difficult for you to get damage on the stone wall. Now, also we'll have hit points. This tells you how much damage it can take. And then it will have immunities, vulnerabilities, and resistances. Effectively, things that may not damage this item whatsoever. Let's say, for example, I want to use electricity on a stone wall. It doesn't really work? Not really. That's just an example, like making a book cold, or trying to do psychic damage to any of these things. Psychic and poison damage, they just don't work on objects. But then they might have vulnerabilities. Paper, vulnerable to fire. things that they're resistant to. A cutting blade or a stabbing blade, the stone wall's resistant to it, but something that's bludgeoning, probably not. Or, again, right tool, pickaxe, that might be cutting into it with a picky point. See, it's very situational. Now, the armor class, there's a chart in the book that gives you an idea of armor class. It's based upon how hard something is and how large something is. The information in the book suggests it based on the material. You look to the material, that's its AC. Harder the material, higher the AC. Now, the other big factor was, as I was saying, hit points. There's again a chart in the book that gives you an idea based on the size of an object, how many hit points it has. Assume if something is bigger than large, you're not going to worry about damaging it with hit points. We're not going to talk about that for a second. But if it's up to large, it's got some hit points. And there's 2 different hit points that are listed in the chart. One for an object that's more fragile. For example, a big old window is probably going to be pretty fragile. Not going to have a lot of hit points. While on the other hand, maybe a set of iron bars are going to be resilient. They're going to have a lot more hit points. So for every size of an object, it's either fragile or resilient. That gives you the range of how many hit points it's going to have. It tells you an average. It tells you the dice to roll. You could do something in between, something on your own. Again, it's giving you information to work off of. Something that's larger, more hit points. Resilient, more hit points than fragile. And the only thing that's a difference here is if the larger object, if breaking something smaller off of it tends to destroy it structurally, then maybe perhaps targeting it. Thinking about like a door. Maybe I want to target the hinges on a door. They might have less hit points than the door itself, maybe higher AC. Or the lock. I want to break a lock if it's got like a padlock on the door, or instead of breaking the door down itself. These are examples of points in time where targeting something smaller as part of a larger object, or small piece of that larger object, might be more effective at destroying it. Now, if something's huge or gargantuan, it tends to be out of your purview of trying to destroy. For example, a huge statue, or like a gargantuan tapestry. But there are always ways of destroying it. The statue can be broken down with something like an earthquake spell. Or the tapestry can be set on fire. It's a tapestry. Granted, I'm cutting away and it's not going to really work. It's too big to really effectively destroy the entire thing. Damage a part of it, yes. And that's where something else can come in. For example, the statue. Maybe you might break it down into sections. That might kind of lead to destroying it, especially if those sections can actually lead to its destruction. If the large leg on the huge statue is destroyed, it's a section, I smash it, maybe it'll make the statue unstable so it will fall over, break apart, be destroyed. Hey, guess what? I only had to destroy a single area of the entire statue, not the entire statue. It can come up that you will try to destroy the entire statue, so coming up with AC and a lot of hit points can be something that you might need to do, but try these other methods first, because again, it's going to have a lot of hit points. It's going to be really tough, really time consuming for your players to break away, chip away at this statue. Now, as I said, for damage types, poison, psychic, not work on any kind of object. After that, damage types, you're going to have to look at the object when you're comparing a damage type. It's as I was giving for examples, like maybe if you look at what substance is made of, what kind of attacks would be more effective? Wood burns. Fire is effective against wood, but fire might not be effective against stone or metal, per se. Metal, it might melt. Stone, not really at all. Cutting rope and leather. You're not going to use bludgeoning damage. You're going to use sort of like a slashing damage for that way, while the bludgeoning damage might work to smash apart a desk. So there's good examples that maybe my club's great for smashing a desk, but my knife's better for cutting through that leather. A tree could be cut down with a pick. An axe is more effective. Pick doing a piercing damage, axe doing slashing damage. You can see the difference here. And that's where you're going to have to use your judgment about what's really effective and ineffective against whatever you're going against. Now, there is something you can use to make objects more resilient. For example, castle walls. Damage threshold. Damage threshold represents the fact that an attack can be absorbed by a object because it is so tough. A castle wall, for example, might have a damage threshold that would say that small fire from like bows or crossbows or hits from swords might do nothing whatsoever, and you would not consider breaking down with those attacks at all. Damage threshold is a number that you must meet or exceed in order to do damage to the wall, or the object, I should really say. So if it had damage threshold 5, this object, if I don't do 5 damage to this object, I deal none. If I do 5 or more, I actually do damage to the object. It does the damage as normal. I'm not reducing this damage at all. Granted, unless it has some kind of resistance to this or vulnerability to this damage, then it might alter it anyway. But I would take a look, smack into it, see if that would actually exceed it to actually start damaging the hit points of this object. If I don't do that 5 or more damage, which is my damage threshold for this example, then it's superficial. I don't actually do damage to it. It pinks off of it. For the castle wall, arrows that don't do that just bink off of it. Bink, 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 bink. Don't do anything to it. Granted, the castle wall probably has more like a 10 damage threshold. Seems more logical. But still, it's a way of saying this thing will absorb a lot of damage before actually taking it. Damage threshold is a good way of making objects more resilient. Anyway, that's it for today. So first off, I finished talking about you role-playing. Using your face, your expressions, your arms, all these things add to your role-playing. And I talked about some techniques to engage all of your players, even those that don't necessarily like role-playing. We moved on to talk about objects, pretty much destroying them. Ways that you can kind of smash them apart. And you as the dungeon master, what the kind of things you have to track when your players are trying to smash them. All the statistics you need to know about. In the next episode, we're going to talk about combat. We're going to move on to combat more on you on the dungeon master side and what you can do to keep track of various things, understand various things, process them, all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I hope you're having a great day. If you've had any interesting stories of, well, destroying stuff, destroying objects, the unusual things that you were trying to smash, and the very strange ways that you went about it, tell me in the comments below. Interesting stories, fun little anecdotes that I would love to hear about. Remember to check out my links in the description below, my Twitter, Discord, Twitch, and Patreon. Great ways to reach me, check out my other content, and to support me if you want to get some great rewards on the Patreon. Anyway, until the next time, I bid you farewell.